when the trees begin to speak. The train had long since left the last town with a name on the map, and now it coasted like a whisper through forest so thick it swallowed the light. In the near-empty carriage, Robert Emmerson sat alone with a worn leather suitcase and a folded letter he had never dared to open. He was not a man given to impulsiveness. At 47, he had constructed a quiet life out of habit and avoidance. A modest flat, a collection of moth-eaten books, and a job cataloging the archives of people who died with no known relatives. But 3 weeks ago, a package arrived on his doorstep with no return address. Inside, a letter with no ink and a small brass key shaped like a tree branch. No handwriting. No marks. Nothing but the faint scent of pine. Yet when he held it, the words formed in his mind with unmistakable clarity, like something whispered from behind his eyes. Come to where you were forgotten. The place beneath the ever-sleeping pines. The house remembers what you have tried to forget. And Robert had come. The train screeched to a stop at a wooden platform hidden among the trees. There was no station. Just a path half swallowed by moss and time, disappearing into the woods like a memory too long buried. As he stepped off the train, the conductor gave him a look, half pity, half warning. No one takes the trail past the third cairn, the old man said. Robert didn't ask what he meant. He started walking. The trail was as silent as it was ancient. Ferns brushed against his ankles like the hands of ghosts. He passed the first cairn, stones stacked carefully ritualistically, then the second, smaller and partially crumbled. By the time he reached the third, the forest had grown impossibly quiet. That's when he heard it. Not the whisper of wind or rustling of leaves, but something deeper, fainter, like the creaking of old floorboards. In the middle of the forest, Robert tightened his grip on the suitcase and moved forward. It appeared suddenly through the trees, like something the forest had been hiding. A house 2 stories tall, wrapped in ivy and shadows. Its windows were intact, though clouded, and its roof bore the stooped posture of age. Yet it stood with a kind of deliberate stillness, as though it had been waiting. The key fit the lock without resistance. Inside, dust blanketed everything, but not evenly. Certain surfaces looked freshly disturbed. A chair pushed slightly out, a teacup on the mantel, a quilt folded at the foot of the stairs. He felt no fear. Only a kind of slow, blooming recognition. The house knew him. He explored without thinking, following the instinct of someone who had walked these halls before. In the upstairs hallway, a door stood ajar. Behind it, a study, dark wood, tall bookshelves and a fireplace with cold ashes. And on the desk, a single sheet of paper. This time the words were visible. You have forgotten the forest, but it has not forgotten you. Suddenly, the trees outside creaked in unison, like the stretching of old limbs. And then they spoke. A chorus of voices, dry and splintered like bark, rose around the house. Robert Emmerson has come home. He stood frozen in the study, the paper still trembling in his hand. Outside the house, the whispering continued, not loud, not urgent, but relentless. The forest seemed to murmur his name from every bough. Robert Emmerson has come home. He pressed his palms against the desk, trying to steady his breathing. This had to be some elaborate prank. Perhaps a cruel joke from a childhood he barely remembered. But as he looked around the room, something inside him shifted. A small ache in the ribs. A flicker behind his eyes. A long-buried familiarity. The scent of the room, dry cedar, old smoke, damp ink, pulled at him like a lullaby. He crossed to the bookshelf, running a finger along the spines of volumes that seemed untouched for decades. One caught his eye, Mycology and Memory, the Consciousness of Trees. He opened it. The inside cover had a name. R. Emmerson, aged 12. His handwriting. He hadn't thought of his childhood in the woods for years. In fact, he couldn't seem to remember much before the age of 15. But here it was, inked proof that he had been here before, studied here, lived here. He flipped through the pages. Some were covered in annotations, underlined phrases, and strange symbols drawn in margins. Spirals, branches, eyes. On one page, scrawled in large, hurried letters. The trees remember all things. Some of them wait to be forgiven. A floorboard creaked behind him. He turned, but no one stood there. Only the sound of breathing. Or was it? That night he couldn't bring himself to sleep upstairs. He found a dusty armchair near the fireplace and lit a fire from the half-rotted logs stacked nearby. The flames crackled, and outside the forest sighed in long gusts, like a slumbering thing exhaling through roots and leaves. In the glow of the fire, Robert examined the brass key again. It was shaped like a tree branch, but not just any branch. He recognized it now. The bifurcation, the little knobs like knuckles. It was the branch of a crooked pine that had once grown beside the house. At least it had when he was a child. A memory emerged, disjointed and sudden. Him at 12. Standing by that twisted pine. Speaking into its bark. "If you can hear me, please don't tell them where I went." But who was he talking to? Sleep finally took him in waves. He drifted through shallow dreams of moss and fog, of voices beneath the soil. At some point during the night the fire went out. And when he opened his eyes, there were small footprints in the ash. Child-sized. Bare. Leading away from the hearth and toward the door to the cellar. The cellar door had not been opened the night before. Of that Robert was sure. Yet now it stood ajar by a hand's width, and the footprints in the cold ash led directly to it. The air drifting up from the gap was strangely sweet, like rotting fruit and forgotten blossoms. He took a candle from the mantel, lit it with shaking fingers, and descended the steps. The cellar was carved partially from earth, partially from stone. The walls were uneven and webbed with roots. Shadows shivered at the edge of the candle's reach. Dust hung thick in the air, disturbed only by his breath and the quiet stir of something deeper than silence. In the far corner of the room stood an old armoire. Not a tool shelf. Not a wine rack. An armoire. Its doors were etched with patterns that seemed vaguely familiar. Swirls like wind, leaf veins, a spiral sun. On impulse, Robert opened it. Inside was a coat. Small. Blue. He reached for it, and a memory struck him like a storm. A boy in a blue coat running through a forest. His forest. Laughter echoing off the trunks. Another child behind him. No, two. One with long black hair, one pale and solemn. Their names tumbled toward him but vanished before they reached his lips. And then screaming. The boy lost. A cliff. A fall. A silence that stretched for years. He gasped and pulled his hand away from the coat. On the inside of the armoire's door, someone had carved words. "If you open what was buried, you must bury what you opened." Behind him something moved. Not the scurrying of rats or the groan of wood, but a single deliberate breath. He turned the candle toward the sound, and saw the outline of a child standing in the dirt, barefoot and still. Its eyes reflected nothing. Its face was familiar. And it whispered, "You left us there. Under the tree. Do you remember?" Robert staggered back. The flame flickered wildly, and then darkness. He came to in the kitchen, daylight bleeding through the filthy window. He didn't remember climbing out of the cellar. He didn't remember dreaming. But his hands were coated in soil. On the table sat a small bowl of fruit. Apples. Pale. Shining. Impossible, he'd seen no orchard. His breath caught. In the hallway mirror, a child stood behind him. But when he turned, nothing. The whispers began again that evening. Louder this time. Not just from the forest but from the walls. The pipes. The old clock. They came in fragments, broken phrases, questions with no answer. "Why didn't you come back?" "We waited until the frost." He never remembered the promise. That night he dreamed of a garden behind the house. Except it wasn't a garden. It was a circle of 13 trees. In the center, a pit. Covered in stones. In the dream he walked toward it with something heavy in his arms. A child's shape. A body. No face. When he awoke, the brass key lay on his chest. Wet with earth. Robert stood at the window until dusk turned the forest black. He had not eaten. He had not spoken. He simply listened, because now the house was speaking. Every creak of wood, every moan of wind through the gaps carried meaning. The orchard he'd dreamed of, the circle of trees, he had to see it. He left with a lantern and followed a path that didn't exist yesterday. It curved behind the house, through ivy and mist. The further he walked, the more he felt the air resist him, as if the forest itself were testing his resolve. And then he saw them. 13 trees. Each one gnarled and twisted, surrounding a stone-covered mound like sentinels around a grave. The lantern flickered. The silence deepened. He stepped into the circle. The ground was softer there. Yielding. He knelt and touched the stones. Moss-covered. But one stone had a symbol, a carved spiral. He knew that symbol. He had carved it. With shaking hands he began to remove the stones. One by one. Until he reached the earth. And then the final stone turned, revealing the hollow beneath. Not a grave. A door. Buried in the ground. He hesitated. But something deeper, something older, pulled him forward. He opened it. A tunnel led beneath the trees. Not natural. Not made by tools either. It felt grown. Roots coiled like ribs around its walls, and as Robert walked, the air thickened. Time twisted. Memory surged. He reached a chamber. Round. Root-wrapped. In its center, a chair. A child sat there. Oh, the child. Blue coat. Bare feet. Empty eyes. But this time, it spoke with a voice that echoed in Robert's mind like a memory of his own. He ran. You let us die. Robert fell to his knees. The memories poured in now, like floodwater through a cracked dam. 3 children had played here. He had been their leader. Their games were strange, built of stories and dares. They had found the tunnel. Built the circle of trees. Made pacts. If we ever have to go away, young Robert had said, we come back here. We never forget. But something had gone wrong. One child, Elias, had vanished. Fell into the pit. Or was pushed. The others had buried the tunnel. Sworn silence. Fled. And Robert had forgotten. Till now. You brought me back, the child said. But not to forgive. To finish. Suddenly the chamber groaned. Roots twisted. The walls closed in. The lantern died. Robert awoke outside the circle of trees. It was dawn. The stones were back in place. The forest was still. But something had changed. The house was no longer silent. Everywhere he walked, the trees whispered, not words but emotions. Regret. Fury. Sadness. In the kitchen the mirror was shattered. In the study the letter had vanished. In the cellar the armoire was gone, but the coat remained. Hanging alone. He packed his suitcase. He did not say goodbye. At the 3rd cairn the whisper followed him. We remember you now. He boarded the train without looking back. As it pulled away he pressed a hand to the window. Pine trees stretched in endless rows. Silent. But in the reflection of the glass his eyes were not his own. Weeks passed. Robert Emmerson returned to the city, but the city no longer felt like his. The flat, the job, the coffee in the same chipped mug. It was all a theater built for someone else. His hands trembled when he passed trees. He avoided parks. Mirrors. At night he dreamed of whispers. Not voices, but roots. Twisting. Pulling. Calling. And sometimes he would wake with soil beneath his fingernails. Once pine needles in his bed. One morning the postman knocked. Another package. No return address. Inside, a child's drawing. 3 stick figures in a forest. One of them was crossed out with black ink. The other 2 had no faces. Below, scrawled in a child's hand. You came back once. You'll come back again. And Robert realized. He had not left. Not really. The next time someone visited the forest they found the house crumbled. Ivy devoured its beams. Moss blanketed its floors. No light shone from the windows. But deep within the roots, in the tunnel beneath the orchard, the chair remained. And sometimes if you stand at the 3rd cairn at dusk, the trees will whisper a name. Not yours. His. Because the forest never forgets its children. Only waits for them to return.